This video will deeply challenge everything you've heard and think you know about my birthplace, South Africa. There is a horrific and purposeful genocide going on against white South Africans. Before I begin to explain the situation, I want to give a brief description of the history of South Africa. European settlement began in the 17th century with the arrival of Dutch colonists. These colonists, mostly farmers, faced opposition from invading tribes from the north, the Bantu Zulu peoples, who greatly displaced the native ethnic groups of South Africa. The majority of Africans in South Africa are not indigenous to the country but descended from northern invaders who arrived in roughly the same time period as European settlers. Both the black and the white population of South Africa are colonists. The only natives in South Africa are the Khoisan, otherwise known as Bushmen. And the only reason there are still some of them left is because whites colonized the western part of South Africa and Namibia before the blacks had moved in to finish the extermination of the Khoisan. Britain invaded in 1795, and as a result of a series of conflicts between the British, African peoples and Dutch Afrikaners handed over the colony to the British. Dutch Afrikaners were given no option to return to their native homelands in Europe, unlike the inhabitants of many other European colonies. Whether right or wrong, it was whites that created the cities and nations of South Africa. So yes, it was their country. No one could possibly deny that South African architecture is European. But now that they have handed over the land to the black majority, they are living in fear and under threat of extinction. White people in South Africa currently make up less than 10% of the population and declining. They are 40% of the homicide victims. More than 400,000 white South Africans now live in poverty. Extensive affirmative action legislation on behalf of blacks has put white minorities at a significant disadvantage, especially in areas of skilled work, in which whites make up the largest percentage of the available workforce. White South Africans are refused employment because of the color of their skin. The Black Economic Empowerment Program has made it so that every department of a company is demographically represented at around 80% black. South Africa is the biggest welfare state in the world. 6% of the population contribute to 99% of all tax revenue. Thousands of white people are forced to live in squatter camps under inhumane conditions. And the white people who do own their own homes mostly live in gated communities and in homes with electric fences and armed response teams. White farmers are being attacked, tortured, maimed, raped, and murdered in the most violent ways. About 50 people on average are murdered in South Africa per day, of which at least 20 of them are whites. Seeing that white people make up only 9% of the demographics, the white murder rate in South Africa is astounding. According to the human rights organization Genocide Watch, the murder rate among South African white farmers is 4 times higher than amongst South Africans en masse. That rate increases every month after President Zuma sang this song. The rise in farm attacks has been blamed on increasingly anti-white hate speech, particularly from the ruling African National Congress. South African President Zuma has pledged to expropriate land and white businesses from white owners and hand it over to blacks. The constant refrain of this song incites people to kill white farmers. Incentive for genocide has to come from somewhere. People don't just go out and start killing people because they feel disadvantaged. They need to be called to action. The African National Congress and Malema defend this song and has openly stated whites will be slaughtered unless they give up all land. South Africa's government, which has been led by Nelson Mandela's African National Congress since the end of apartheid, is outstandingly incompetent and corrupt. The government is appallingly bad at everything it does. Education, healthcare, infrastructure, security, everything that is a government function is in shambles. According to the South Africa Institute of Race Relations, half of the crimes are not even reported as the police are so corrupted and fail to provide any solutions. Since the end of apartheid in 1994, more than 70,000 and counting white South Africans have been murdered, of which more than 4,000 were commercial farmers. Exact figures are very hard to come by, as the South African police have stopped releasing statistics about the race of the victims. Monitoring group Genocide Watch says the cover-up has been exacerbated by American and European governments, which have remained silent about the problem, reinforcing the campaign of denial. South Africa is about the most dangerous place you can be outside of a war zone. Nelson Mandela was able to hold the Rainbow Nation together, but he has passed on. Now, according to Genocide Watch, South Africa is at pre-genocide stage 6 of 8, preparation. While sometimes farmers and their families are tortured to obtain information such as the whereabouts of the keys to the safe, human rights groups say that the excessive brutality is intended to send a message to the general farming community: get out of our country. Victims are often restrained, harmed with weapons such as machetes and pitchforks, burnt with boiling water or hot irons, dragged behind vehicles and shot. Female victims are almost always raped in these instances. And in many instances, fathers are tied up and forced to watch their wife and children be brutally raped and murdered right in front of their eyes before they are released. It is important to note that not all who are murdered on farms are white people. However, black farmers are not subjected to the same levels of torture as their white counterparts. The South African media makes a great attempt to cover up on the white genocide, and it's mostly foreign newspapers who post articles on white murders. What makes matters even worse is that many blacks take pride in the killing of whites. Some of them would openly admit their racist intentions on national television, while others make banners with hate speech written all over it. In the rare cases of prosecution of these murderers, hundreds of blacks would gather around the police station where the accused are being held, demanding their release. Yes, these murderers are considered heroes by many. Few people know that Mandela supported terrorist bombings of innocent men, women, and children. This is the Mandela the control media won't show you. Mandela's wife Winnie likes to burn people alive with tires and gasoline. Necklacing is a method the ANC used to terrorize their opposition. White South Africans have been native for more than 350 years. Whites were farming in South Africa before Newton discovered gravity. If, however, no length of time erases the stain of colonization, it should be noted that the dominant Bantu peoples of today's South Africa displaced the Khoisan peoples who lived in South Africa before them. The Boers created a great nation, one so good for blacks that millions moved for the jobs, education, and medical care that the whites created. Before the ANC, less than 5% were unemployed. Now the unemployment rate is staggering. South Africa used to be the safest nation in Africa for both whites and blacks. Now it is the murder and rape capital of the world. As Malema and Zuma incite calls for genocide, whites are ready to fight back, and it will inevitably break out into a full-blown race war. South Africa was heavily demonized by the media when the apartheid fell. However, the fact that over 800,000 Tutsi were genocided by the Hutus in Rwanda was overlooked. Black ethnic genocides and wars have been happening in the Congo, Zimbabwe, Somalia, Ethiopia, Liberia, Botswana, and in many other African countries. But the media coverage of Africa focused solely on the safest, best, and freest nation of all of Africa. The media shows you pictures of different ethnic bathrooms in South Africa as proof of its evil, but now is completely silent on the horrific genocide that is going on. Thousands of white people are being tortured and murdered in the most barbaric, dehumanizing ways. As matters stands now, the South African government will not contribute to the struggle of white genocide. They are constantly throwing fuel on the high-burning fire of politically motivated murders, and they will not stop. Many South Africans are calling out to the rest of the world and have asked the EU for right to return, fearing ethnic cleansing. But our governments ignore this issue and instead are flooding our countries with African and Muslim migrants who share cultures completely different to our own. The most sinister part of all this is that the same globalist forces that worked to destroy South Africa are now working to destroy what is left of the civilized West. If you really care about human rights, please share this video and raise awareness on the horrific ongoing genocide of white South Africans.